Being a mother, and we referred to Australia yesterday as mother, so we have another mother, so to speak. But actually, Rosemary's on a sabbatical. She's not at Sydney Uni. She's actually working at the St James Ethics Centre on the Corporate Responsibility Index. We've been talking a lot about corporate responsibility and reputation. This is the Corporate Social Responsibility Summit, and her work is very apposite to what we are all about here today. And the index really features about 40 companies, 40 corporations in Australia, but they also talk to many others. And you would be aware of the work of St James Ethics Centre. They do some great work, and they are changing part of our world. So with no further ado, please welcome Rosemary.
Okay. Can you hear me? Yeah. Good morning to everybody. I thought further to Professor Stephen Cohen's comments yesterday, for those of you that were here, Stephen was talking about reputation, in particular the reputation of Nike as an example, and he said he did what all good academic researchers do, and he went home and he asked his daughter what she thought of Nike. And so I thought I'd try and do the same thing. So last night when I got home, I asked my Generation Y daughter, would she ever consider working for Nike? And her response was, no, so to speak. Years ago, they used children to make their shoes, she told me, and now they're a nothing brand. So it was a bit condemning. And then I said, they've actually been improving their practices, and her response to that was, I wouldn't want to work with a company that still has this association, even though they may have changed. So I thought that was fairly significant stuff, and she's a reasonably thoughtful 22-year-old. Okay. In this brief but very exciting 15 minutes, or possibly slightly less than 15 minutes, I'm going to try and use some quotes as I'm delivering the presentation. I guess that's been part of the theme at this conference, the use of quotes, which I guess are the use of voices. This draws on the ideas of the US ethicist Carol Gilligan, that some of you may have read about over the years, and her analogy of moral voices as part of ethical conversation. Allowing for many moral voices to join the conversation allows for a diversity of views. Traditionally, in the milieu of the business world, the conversation's been limited to a few voices. Or maybe we'll use this one. Okay, I'll lean into it. Okay, so analogy of moral voices as part of the ethical conversation. Traditionally in the business world there's been limited voices, but now there's new voices joining the conversation. Things are becoming more inclusive, and I guess that's part of the point of this summit, the bringing together of a range of voices to join in the conversation. My couple of quotes, I thought I'd quickly get you to guess who made them. They were both in last week's media, both fairly significant people. The first one is, the question is, do corporate executives, provided they stay within the law, have responsibilities in their business activities other than to make as much money for their shareholders as possible? And my answer to that is, no, they do not. And Emily's not allowed to answer. Yes? It was Milton Friedman, the great US economist. And he was very influential in the thinking that we have in business up to this day. Very well guessed. The next quote, again last week's media, another influential person. When you ask the question now, in 2006, does an appreciation of environmental sustainability or the fair treatment of communities where companies are operating, or the ethics of the corporate executives, or the treatment of employees and the families of the employees, and whether they can have healthy lives, does that matter to the success of the companies in question and the investment process that looks at choices among those companies? Yes, it does. How could it not matter? Any guesses? Al Gore, the man of the moment. Okay, so there are two pertinent voices which serve to track the changes in thinking towards a much more interconnected worldview and its economics. And that's the journey I guess I want to take you on this very brief presentation. I coined the term career ethics in recognition of the fact that just as business ethics is a growing field, so is the inclusion of ethical considerations in people's career choices. Employees are keen to pursue what they perceive to be meaningful careers, which includes employers of choice that offer things like corporate social responsibility practices, such as work-life integration, a consideration of environmental and social impacts, ethical governance, and an alignment of one's own values to the company's values, or at least the opportunity to engage in a discussion of those values. These are issues for all generations, and I'm certain that they are for everybody here today, but it may turn out to be the Generation Y that drives these home, and that's probably why there's so much attention paid to them, as the war for talented newcomers to the labour market heats up and the numbers of young people replenishing the workforce begins to rapidly decline whilst baby boomers move out the other end. Because I've been working in the area of careers, I suppose I'm quite mindful of what these statistics are, and they are fairly substantial, so I'll outline those in a moment. So basically what I want to ask, and very quickly, how important are these issues to our young people, our students? How do students judge employers on these issues? From a careers practitioner or psychologist perspective, what resources are needed to assist in this kind of career decision making? From an employer's point of view or company's point of view, how to best communicate corporate responsibility practices and initiatives to prospective candidates? Okay. So, again, very quickly, we'll run through a quick background of current careers thinking, the research that's out there, my own research and resource development, and if there's time, a quick how to communicate CSR to prospective recruits, in particular that very savvy Gen Y group. Okay, systems thinking is at the heart of corporate social responsibility. We don't live in a vacuum. We're finding that out now that we've got impacts that we have to pay attention to. We live in a world of interconnected systems, and that's what this is really a kind of a diagram of. The orange, or the red centre being ourself, which sits within a system of family and close relationships, which sits within a system of our outer life, including our workplace, our social life. That sits within larger social systems and global systems. That sits within our place in time. The concept of career ethics is in alignment with current careers thinking, in particular systems thinking and careers construction theory. One of the proponents of this is a fellow called Mark Savickas, who was out here from America earlier in the year for an international careers conference. According to Mark, there are people right now in America going to bed and thinking, hoping that when they wake up tomorrow, everything will be back to how it used to be. Sadly, that's not going to be the case. So today, where old institutions and certainties are under siege, there's a yearning for predictability, and we heard that from Vincent's talk earlier. Mattering and a sense of purpose emerge as themes in the careers counselling session. Early careers theories relied more on things like vocational guidance matching, and many of you here probably had some vocational guidance testing in your early days and were told you should be a school teacher or an engineer, etc. And these are valuable, but they don't take into consideration the whole social setting. These are some points of Mark's that you can just quickly scan over. Really what he's saying is that in negotiating each new work opportunity, we seek to not just to negotiate salary, but to negotiate meaningful work. The use of life themes to help the self-organisation of the personality and the self-extension of career adaptability into a self-defining whole. That's a little bit heavily psychological, but I think you can sort of see what he's talking about. Rapid changes in the labour market, a desire for stability, a desire to impose meaning on what we're doing. We're told by employing organisations that we are really the ones responsible for driving our careers now. There's been a change in that sort of view. Okay. Just briefly, in looking at these issues, we're taking the broad view of corporate responsibility, throwing a wide net, if you like, as we consider these issues. Also, the context today, particularly in Australia. I've pinched a lovely quote from John McFarlane, the CEO of ANZ. Thank you, Siobhan. Companies are not islands that exist separately from the communities within which they operate. Successful companies understand and engage with their customers, their staff and their communities. So you can see the systems thinking behind that, the interconnected view, and you can see that a CEO that's capable of coming up with that kind of quote is going to attract the worker who is seeking a meaningful career. Lots of drivers in CSR or corporate responsibility, and one of the big ones, one of the growing ones, as I've highlighted down the bottom, is employees, their attraction and retention. Just briefly on statistics and the Generation Y phenomenon. Recently there was a conference in Sydney on Skilling Australia. And the stats that were given were in 2000 to 2005 there was a net increase of 175,000 workers per annum. Yes? Oh. And that is going to shrink down to in 2020 there's a projected number of only 57,000 workers. So that's going to really cause this to be a driver. I've got 5 minutes to race through about 18 slides, so let's begin the gallop. Okay, there's some research out there. Surprisingly, only a small amount of research and an even smaller amount of peer-reviewed research, and when you come from a university background, peer reviewing is all. This piece of research by High Flyers, made in 2005, they interviewed over 6,000 students. They asked them from a closed list of questions what was their the most very important characteristic of their first employer. In top place was a socially responsible employer. I know that you probably can't read all of that, but subsequent to that it was a well-known organisation, and then a commercially successful organisation, and then a range of other categories. So you can see with numbers like that, 6,000 students, that's a fairly impacting statistic. Survey in The Guardian in the UK recently in July, over 70% of students say companies' ethical track record is a crucial factor, and they rely more heavily on media. Media, of course, means new media as well, so that's all the chattering in the internet version of such things. A Stanford MBA study, a number of you have probably heard of, where they reviewed, I think it was about 800 MBA students in Europe and the UK. More than 97% of them were willing to forego financial benefits to work for an organisation with a better reputation for CSR and ethics. They were willing to forego, on average, 14% of their salaries. So the big surprise was that no one thought that corporate ethics was all that important to job seekers, but it is. I did a scoping survey earlier in the year, in April, at Sydney Uni, our big careers fair, where those of you from large companies and public sector organisations set up stands to attract students to work for them. I used that opportunity to grab students and survey them on this question: does an organisation's corporate social responsibility practice and reputation influence your interest in applying to them? And I outlined the different areas of that. The result: 77% said yes and 23% said no. That pretty well matches up with the Guardian's study that I reported on. Now, I needed to do some sort of further, more formal research, if you like, to find out further what's their understanding of what CSR is and just how they actually judge an employer to make those decisions. Oh, this slide actually just breaks down that group by discipline. And, of course, in the lead is the art student saying, yes, CSR is an influencing factor. Followed by commerce. So they weren't so hard-headed as I thought they might have been. The last group, lagging behind. Oh, actually, second last group, law. And finally, medicine, pharmacy, health. But that's probably because they don't see corporate responsibility as an issue for their career. Very detailed slide. I'm going to put this PowerPoint presentation up on my website. This is the research I'm doing now, which is more detailed, which I hope to be peer-reviewed. I'm asking students what values are important in their career decision-making, and I'm embedding corporate responsibility values in with traditional values like job security and geographical location to find out, like, what's the significance of this. So far, I've interviewed 16 students, and obviously I hope to grow that number, so this is really early days. If I clustered just the corporate responsibility values together next to all of the other values, it would look like that, with the red big part belonging to corporate responsibility. There's some qualitative findings in interviewing them. A real pleasure to interview them. Incredibly reflective, insightful, savvy, cynical, but great young people. Ideal company. What's your ideal company? Supportive, challenging, responsible, good reputation. What's a good reputation? Ethical, reliable, good results, positive social image. Define corporate responsibility for me. This student, at the base of that quote there, says it's to do with above and beyond regulation. They all had the idea of many stakeholders. A company has many stakeholders that it's responsible to, no matter what their background was. Again, really lovely, insightful pieces of quotes. Down the bottom there, you can assess a company by the way they react to a problem, whether created by them or from outside. Very interesting to see what response they take. And whether they have resources to deal with it. And I guess that's about reputation, that's about having corporate responsibility practices built into your infrastructure so that inevitably when there is some stuff up somewhere in the organisation, you are able to act swiftly and to come out in public and to be transparent. How do you judge organisations? I gave them a series of commonly used sources to judge, and media was the top one. Again, these are still small sample numbers. Media and word of mouth. And the view was, yes, we know media is biased, but we know, depending on which media source we go with, what the bias actually is. And if there is a story in the media, it must have been big to get there in the first place. So that's their thoughts on media. They tend to think of like employer information, annual reports, websites and things as propaganda. They would still use them though, so don't throw them away. The word of mouth is really interesting, and that's trying to get an authentic take on what that employer's about, and that's why it's really important that students tend to tell each other if they know their older brother's working for blah company, that kind of, and has something to say about it. That word goes around very, very quickly. For this reason, I've started developing resources so that they can actually have the information to ask the questions. So it's kind of a driver from the bottom up, if you like, and I'm really encouraging them to have the conversation with companies. Working on the Corporate Responsibility Index with the people inside some of these corporations who are trying to get resources to do the right thing, it will help them to know that this sort of shrinking Gen Y human resource are actually asking questions about what are your practices, but they need the language to know how to ask those questions. So that's what that sheet is in front of you. Definitions of the very, myriad of ways to describe corporate responsibility, issues for reflection on what do you think is important to you, the bottom part, things you can do. So that's really about getting them to be proactive. I'm not telling them what to believe, it's things they can do. This can be used for anybody, but in the case of university students, they have got good research and critical thinking skills. On the back, some comparative data. This is what the students are saying that they want. They want comparative data. There's not a lot of comparative data out there. So they're really just pieces of sample information. On the front of the sheet, it refers to a site called corporateregister.com. That's where any organisation can globally upload their sustainability reports, so that's a great way for them to find out. That said, when I talk to students about what resources they'd like to see, they want them to be authentic, but they want them to be simple. I was at a talk recently, feedback from the global reporting new generation of sustainability reporting guidelines, and I think it was Sam Moyson from IAG said, with our sustainability reports, they're big, heavy documents. Who actually reads them? Who takes the time? Who are we writing them for? I think it's an important point when you're looking at attracting people into the organisation. You need something simple but authentic. Just to say, that flyer that you've got there is now circulating nationally, so it's available at all university campuses, and I've just completed a UK version which, as we speak, is now being distributed to the thousands of university students in the UK, so they'll all have that language, the opportunity to think about these issues. I'm also going to be doing a how to be an ethical employee, just to be fair. If you've got any ideas of what you'd like to see in there on how to be an ethical employee, then please blog my site. Just a really brief point. I know I must be really pushing for time now. A lovely quote from Ernst & Young's Environment and Sustainability Services team. People are crucial to the innovation process in this complex, rapidly changing world. We need to be proactive, not reactive. Therefore, it's important to recruit people who have an interest in sustainability innovation. You'd be wanting to recruit someone that ethics was important to. You would not be wanting to recruit someone who didn't care about ethics or sustainability. Okay, how to communicate CR to prospective recruits. Again, it's really about communication, it's about authenticity, it's about reputational risk. I actually didn't make a slide up for this because I thought by now I would have completely run out of time. Basically, if you're working in a corporation and you're responsible for recruitment, you need to get the information flows going internally. Conversations, linkages, who does sustainability reporting, does anyone specifically look after CR issues, community investment programs. When you're planning a recruitment campaign, involve those people. How about a sympathetic board member or group executive and getting them on side? Communicating externally, it needs to be proactive, don't wait to be asked. You need to, as I was saying, produce authentic, accessible information. Look at your recent recruits and what attracted them into the organisation. Demonstrate leaders visibly putting the case. Once your new staff are on board, invite them to be involved in any CR activities. Give them an opportunity to set some of this agenda. And finally, do nothing and run a serious reputational risk, as in the sobering Nike research story. Finally, if you can blog your thoughts on my site, I'll have a version of this presentation up there. I've got those PDF, How to Choose an Ethical Employer leaflets on the site you can download freely, including the UK version. And that's it.
Thank you very much, Rosemary. Rosemary will join the panel after the panel presentations that are about to take place, so you can ask any questions of Rosemary at that point in time or later after at lunch. It's interesting, you know, that you've titled this How to Choose an Ethical Employer. It seems that the ball is going on to the other foot. It used to be, you know, all the power used to be with the employer in choosing who they wanted working for them and, you know, line up and we'll choose the best one. But I do work, my company Forte does work with major banks, Macquarie Bank and others too. And I've worked on graduate programs, you know, and also on the other side, the executives pitching to graduates to get the best graduates, you know, to do a great presentation, to attract the best cream. That seems to be happening. The power is going over to you. Well done. Thank you, Rosemary.